Welcome to the Pulse of Spokane. I'm Tyler LeMasters. Today we have Borris. He is a former city planner for our beautiful city of Spokane. What's up, man?
Hey, not much. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I am so excited to have you on the show because you worked on a successful project for us, the Monroe Street project,
Yep.
which I'm sure a lot of us have noticed how beautiful that street is all the way. Why don't you tell us about the project? Give us the overview.
Yeah, absolutely.
What your role was in it, that
So,
kind of thing.
Monroe Street project. It was a rebuild of a city street that was kind of deteriorating in a core business district.
Mm-hmm.
The process itself was long. My role in it was to manage sort of the public participation side of it, and so when the city of Spokane goes into a city project like this, there's a lot of stuff that happens before, they break the ground. There's a lot of planning with the neighborhood, Emerson and Garfield, beforehand, and everybody said, like, hey, Monroe Street is a hazard in some regards because the sidewalks were really narrow. If you've been out there before it was built, and if you were driving, you're getting in the middle lane, you feel like your mirrors are getting knocked off. And so there were a lot of, collisions, pedestrian accidents, things like that. And so the city applied for a safety grant from Washington. I believe it was the state grant, and they received it, which called for
a safety grant.
Yeah, safety grant.
Okay.
So it was
So
based
they basically said there's so many accidents here, it's super dangerous.
Yep.
And so give us some money to do
Exactly.
this.
So there were a lot of,
That's great.
little stuff like your mirrors get knocked off, but also more serious things like pedestrians getting hit by cars. And there were a couple of fatalities over the years. And so that really elevated the project. And so the safety grant looked at the street and said, there are too many lanes. From an engineering perspective, if you were to build, back then it was a street with 4 lanes. If you were to build to current engineering standards, you need 100 feet of right-of-way to build wide enough lanes to match standards.
Okay.
Well, Monroe was 75 feet.
Yeah.
So they were cramming 100 feet worth of right-of-way into a small section of 75. And that's why it created all those accident points and areas of interference, is because narrow lanes, really small sidewalks. When you're trying to turn left, you're trying to watch for 2 lanes of traffic. So long story short, the safety grant allowed for rebuilding it to current standards, which facilitated it going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes in each direction with the center turn lane, but bigger sidewalks. So, there's some controversy around that. Some people dislike the fact that, and were concerned about taking lanes away. And so part of my work was, how do we go out there and speak to the public and get buy-in for this project and make sure we take into account all of the users of the street? Because predominantly when you talk to people, they're like, well, what happens to the driver? Will my commute slow down? Will it take me longer to get through if there are less lanes? And the conversation was like, perhaps, but besides the driver, there's also 3 other users. You've got the pedestrian, you've got the transit users, then you've got the neighborhood people who live there, who experience the hazard of the street, and you've also got the business owners who are trying to operate a business.
And they were concerned about the whole project.
Exactly.
And where it was going to go, how long it was going to take.
Yep.
I mean, legitimate concerns.
Sure.
If you're a business and you're going to shut down the road for a year or a season or something like that, they're thinking, how can they survive? And this is pre-COVID, so no one had been shut down for very long.
Yeah, right now if you say we're going to shut down for 4 months, people are like, 4 months, really? Because COVID's really brought a new realm to this whole thing.
For sure.
So,
So what are the biggest challenges in communicating that with people? Because people, correct me if I'm wrong, but businesses and people, they do have the power to kind of shut these projects down if they make enough stink, if they're loud enough. Yeah. Petitions, they can lawyer up, all kinds of stuff.
Well, to be fair, all of their concerns were legitimate.
Yeah.
And I think that's the place you start with. You say, yes, concerns are valid. Now let's have a conversation. Let's hear you out, and let's figure out how can we mitigate or lessen the impacts that are going to happen. But also let's talk about things that maybe you're afraid of that don't come to fruition. For example, people thought you'd be backed up for a long time behind the bus if you take the lanes down from 2 to 1.
Yeah.
So we did some studies. We had somebody go out there and just test it. Like, if you stayed behind the bus, how much longer will your commute be? And it extended by maybe 30 to 40 seconds to a minute, which is that's a lot if you're behind a bus. At the same time, it's not a long process in the grand scheme of things if you're also increasing sidewalk activity, you're making it safety for your customers. So you have to balance all those factors out. We also did compromises. So the way we structured public participation was informing and involving. So here are some grant parameters that have to happen for us to get the grant. We're informing you of this. Like, we can't change this.
Gotcha.
But there are some elements of the grant where we want to involve you. So, for example, informing was we had to take the street light out at one of the intersections to create better flow.
Sure.
That was part of the safety grant. We had to put in some sort of way to protect pedestrians. The grant, we wrote it up. We said we put pedestrian islands in the center of the street.
Yeah.
So pedestrians could come across. And the business owner said, no, that would be actually problematic because then you couldn't turn into our driveway. So on that one, we're like, well, this is involving. The idea is we need pedestrian safety. So we took the islands out and said, instead we'll do those blinking lights. So there was a compromise. But the light itself had to be removed. So by doing that from the get-go, you set expectations. Like, we're not going to change these parts of the grant because we need them to get the funds, but here are all the places that we can be flexible.
Yeah.
And by creating that structure, we're able to compromise where all the users, nobody won like 100%. You didn't get everything you wanted, but you got enough to where the project worked. And then you alleviate the concerns by providing funding. So, for example, one of the concerns was it's going to take forever to do, a year or more, because traditionally you'd shut down one side of the street and you'd build it, and then the next season hits, you'd build the other side.
So how'd you guys do it?
So we said, well, instead of doing that, let's think outside the box. We hired 2 contractors instead of 1.
Okay.
And we split the project into 4 quadrants, 4 sections.
Okay.
And 2 contractors started on each end, 1 section each. So 2 sections were under construction fully curb to curb, while the other 2 remained open. Then we spent about, I forget how much it was, but we spent marketing dollars to do a Facebook campaign. We hired a professional social media company to drive traffic to say these parts are open for you to park. The ones under construction, you can park over here on Post and walk over and still get to the business. So we did that. We infused funds into a marketing campaign. We hired 2 contractors, and I believe there was an incentive.
And this is all from the grant? Like, you were able to use the safety grant for
Yes.
this?
And there were some additional city in-kind donation or in-kind contributions as well.
Sure.
I don't remember exactly the mechanism. It was grant plus some city funds plus neighborhood funds. So it was a combination.
So how long did it end up taking altogether?
It took only 1 season. So I think the construction, happened as early as it got warm, and then it ended before winter. So 1 construction cycle.
Talking like 7 months or
7
something?
months. We actually finished, I
Wow.
think, 4 weeks ahead of schedule.
Wow.
So
That never happens.
no,
That never happens
No.
with the city. They're always slow.
it helped because
And not just Spokane. I'm just saying cities in general.
But part of that is due to the success of having that conversation and saying to people who were concerned, we hear you and your concerns are valid. We weren't brushing them off.
Yeah.
But we're also saying, like, hey, this has to happen in terms of there's this other neighborhood planning process that went on beforehand, and everybody identified these as safety issues. So we can't not do it. We're going to include you.
Sure.
So it finished ahead of schedule. Obviously, we did things a little bit differently. The public campaign, the marketing campaign was new. And as an incentive, we also introduced, as a way to help businesses during the down period, a facade improvement program where the city offered dollar for dollar match up to $10,000. So if you spend $10,000 to improve your facade, we would match that with an additional 10.
Oh, wow.
And so we had, I think, don't quote me, anywhere from 10 to 20 businesses apply and receive grants. So we're able to put out another like $80,000 to $100,000 worth of money from the city side that was matched by private dollars. So you saw, a couple $100,000 worth of facade improvements in addition to the new street. So you drive down, it all just looks new.
It looks great.
Updated.
It looks great. The street looks great.
So I think we just try to provide enough incentive and also again, mitigate the impact. You can't get rid of it 100%, but you can mitigate it.
Yeah.
So
the challenge in Spokane from a city planning perspective is pretty big.
Yeah.
There's conflicting ideologies on what people want to do with the city.
Yeah.
There's conflicting ideologies on whether you should do infill and density or embrace a little more urban sprawl.
Yeah.
There's conflicting ideologies on whether or not people want the city to even grow. Right. And it's not party centric either.
Yeah.
You've got Republicans who don't want the city to grow. You've got Democrats who don't want the city to grow. You've got Republicans who want the city to expand out and developers and neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. And you got Democrats who want that. And, you know, as far as infill and density, you know, you've got mixed bag there too.
Sure.
From your perspective, because you do have your degree in city planning
Sure.
and you've been involved in the city, what is the direction that we need to go? With 10,000 people coming here a year, with COVID migrations from people from bigger cities who are accustomed to certain lifestyles, what's the direction here?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people can get caught up in like a type of development. Their favorite type of development is infill or townhouses or this sort of traffic pattern. And those are good things to look at. You know, there's data behind that. Yeah. I kind of back up and say, well, what's our value system? Like, can we do a value-based approach to all of this? Obviously, there's also state law that kind of governs how you grow, from the Growth Management Act to urban growth areas. And, you know, you're supposed to set your population numbers, and then you're supposed to showcase from a legal perspective, like how your infrastructure will support growth. So there's all these mechanisms at play. But my perspective is we need like all of the above with how much we have in terms of our growth and anticipated people coming.
A little bit of everything.
You need infill. You need to provide. You need to. The thing with infill, what's good about it is if you just think about it from a mathematical perspective, if you're laying out 2 miles of pipe to sprawl, and you've got, let's say, 500 units out there, you know, the cost per mile to get pipe and pavement out there can't be subsidized by those new houses. There's just not enough of them to pay the cost.
Yep.
Versus infill, if you're going, you know, more dense, you're getting maybe triple that amount of residents and a shorter pipe in a way. Yeah. That's just from a purely mathematical perspective. Now, life is more complicated than that. So I think we need to encourage infill. We need to encourage development that is also tasteful and attractive. And I think the value question is livability, walkability, you know, community. I think that the reason people love, for example, Kendall Yards as one example is because it's dense, it's urban, but it also has that feel. There's like more apartment buildings there too. It's a little bit of everything. Yeah. But the number one thing that people really love about it is that I don't need to get behind a wheel of a car if I live in Kendall Yards to get to amenities, to get to the park, to go to a grocery store. And they have 2 sections too.
It's not like they just have one little downtown area. They actually have another little area with you know, donut shop and a coffee shop and a tiny little park. And, you know, it's dynamic. But the way they look at it is they look at like a whole life scenario. They're not just building an apartment unit. Yeah. They're building an apartment unit that's tied to a trail system that ties to a park. Right. So I think you can accomplish elements of that development even if you're more suburban, right? So you don't have to hop in your car and drive to Manitou Park if you're somewhere really far away. So how do we create these livable communities where I call it the retrofitting of suburbs is really the way I see is the way out is you take suburbs that just have residential single family and not a lot of amenities, and you allow through small scale zoning changes, like how do you allow for that local coffee shop to go in so I don't have to hop in my car and drive 5 miles to get a cup of coffee or a gallon of milk. That brings up the most interesting dynamic to me of city planning, which is how do you balance being over controlling with zoning and saying, well, because you and I, we like going to coffee shops. Sure. So when we think of a healthy neighborhood, where we say, okay, you're gonna have a park, and it would be great if we zone for coffee shop and maybe a restaurant here, and it's, but not everyone likes those things, and so it's that balance of okay, I don't want to overplan. Sure. Free market versus planning. Yeah, you know? That's a great question. I think part of it is, in planning terms, we call it middle missing housing. So traditionally, the way zoning works is you separate based on use. You got your factory over here, you've got your industrial, you've got your residential, you've got your recreational, and they're all separated. Yeah. And that's really controlling because you're literally telling like 75% of our city's RSF residential single family, you can't really do anything else. Yeah. That's pretty controlling. Right, from a private property perspective, if you're going to argue that private property rights. So middle missing housing means like our market currently offers either residential single family or high density apartments, but there's other stuff in the middle that's kind of missing that the market would want, but can't technically do because of zoning. So townhouses, there are duplexes and triplexes that look
like sort of old mansions in Brown's edition, just the form of them, you couldn't tell it's a duplex. It doesn't have that traditional sort of ugly duplex look.
Right.
So the I think the answer is more freedom. Actually, we worked on a pilot project called Form-Based Code on Hamilton. So I was one of the project planners on that. And what Form-Based Code says is instead of zoning based on use, just separating it out, you control based on form. Meaning you can have this high of a building, it can be 3 stories, and you can kind of put in a broad range of uses in that building. You can put a coffee shop on the first floor, residential on the second, third.
Right.
And we're not going to control for that and say, no, you can't have commercial here, it's residential, so long as the form of the building is attractive. So you regulate the way it looks, but not what's inside.
Yeah.
And what they found in other cities that have done this form-based code type development is it gives developers great freedom into just mixing a bunch of uses together in a way that doesn't disrupt the city. So there's things out there that have been tried, and I think we've tried in Spokane. We need to continue pressing into them.
It's interesting. I started doing real estate in 2015, and I have a friend. She's actually been on the show, so it's okay. I can talk about her. She is from a Middle Eastern country, and she is a great cook.
Yeah.
Right. And they're refugees. They want to start a business. And so they said, Tyler, find us a place that we can live on top of and cook on the bottom.
Yeah.
Now, to them, this is extremely normal.
Yeah.
Right? They're thinking I'm going to bring them 15, 20 options, and they can figure it out. And they know they're going to do well because they have great food and they're great business people.
Yep.
Nothing. There's one place in town. It's in Brown's Addition. It's always occupied. And so, it's I like what you're saying with mixed use and having different options. And I think it's vibrant.
Yeah.
It makes cities walkable and livable and beautiful and safer too, because walkable means safer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I say retrofitting the suburbs. Some of the suburbs we have, our current zoning code was developed like post World War II, right? And the main idea was cities were really dirty at that time because of heavy industrial use. So you'd separate the uses. And we've still done that sort of mentality with our zoning code. Well, we live in a different world. And so part of it is, can we allow small scale commercial in residential if it adds to the livability, walkability without really messing with the single family nature of the place?
Yeah.
There's a great book in Europe, the European author planners. It's called Zone in the USA, and it makes this funny anecdote where they say, in the United States, people treat a bakery in a residential single family like a nuclear power plant. Like, oh my gosh, this is going to destroy the character of our neighborhood because it's commercial use. And it's just like, you can't take such a broad brush.
Yeah.
Not all industry like a bakery is like going to kill your neighborhood. In fact, it might
look at
add
Rockwood
to
Bakery up near Manitou Park. Look at the Scoop.
Yep.
In the middle of the South Hill. Like people want to live close to these places specifically because they're like, well, I'd love to have a coffee shop that I could walk to from my house on a Sunday morning.
Well, interestingly enough, the only reason those are there is because they're grandfathered in.
Right.
You couldn't do it right. Now, in fact, back in the day at the city, we worked with on a law with Council President Stuckert where they're called neighborhood retail zones. They're these old historic places where you have meat markets and stuff like that that are deep. They're not in use right now. Yeah. Or if you're a developer and you wanted to buy it up and just rehab it into a coffee shop, our current parking standard would require you to have like several parking spaces. There was no space, so your only solution was to tear a house down next door and do a parking lot. So we got
cost effective.
Right. So we kind of got rid of that. We said, hey, if you're zone historical, it's called retail neighborhood zones, will allow you to bypass some of those parking requirements because we would rather have economic development and a lively coffee shop in a reused building than just, oh my gosh, we have to wait for parking spaces. So there's little things we can do now, I think, to fix the problem as we plan long term. How can we take the concerns of people, and again, going back to Monroe, it's not about control. It's about how do we bring the public in and people on different sides of the spectrum and say, look, we can't all win. Like the person who loves suburbia and that type of lifestyle might have to compromise, but also the person who's in love with infill might have to compromise on a few of their ideals if we're going to have a healthy, vibrant city that does planning work and the way we do policy based on finding common ground. I think that's really the key.
Yeah.
So
it's a very complicated world, right?
Yeah.
It's a very complicated issue. But I do like to simplify it in my own mind. Even though I know it's laden with problems,
Sure.
I like to simplify it and think if the free market will allow those neighborhoods that people want to live in to exist, and for that infill to exist, and the density and walkability, and the government needs to take its role of infrastructure seriously in that place, and say, okay, how can we make sure that there's not bottlenecks going out to these suburbs? How can we make sure that these sidewalks are safe in the city and those kinds of things? So, it's very interesting, man.
For sure.
Quick question. We don't have to get into this too much.
Sure.
Parking, should it be free or not free downtown?
Oh, you got me.
I gotcha.
So there's good arguments probably on both sides, right?
Okay.
If it's free parking, it's like I can go down there and hang
for
out all day.
Spokane, though.
Yeah.
Not New York.
For Spokane. So I love to hang out downtown. In fact, I will admit sometimes I get around the system by using my credit card to swipe into the meter and then writing down the code and using the app later to add more time. So that's a trick. If you want to double your time. I think the reason you probably want it paid is you want circulation of customers. So as some customers come in, I think it's 2 hours, 4 hours. You get in, you do your shopping, and then if you just hang out and you're not doing more shopping, it's better for you to create
There's
space.
nothing more American than telling people they can only go downtown to eat dinner for 2 hours.
Yeah.
But and some of them's like hour and a half. There's nothing more American than that.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous.
Yeah. I get it.
I can't eat dinner in an hour. If
I
I'm
get
going
it.
out, I want to enjoy myself.
I do think we could, again, going back to compromise, maybe we expand it to 3 hours or 4 hours so you can park longer. But the basic premise is you want circulation for more customers, for more economic development. That's been the case. It's different if you're at a mall. At a mall, the thing that you have is a bunch of land. You don't have that downtown.
Yeah.
That's sort of the market difference is constraint of land. But that's why there's parking garages and things like that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm for it with common sense timeframes. We'd say put it that way.
For sure.
And make sure it's affordable.
I feel like we can continue doing this, but we should probably cut it off.
Okay.
I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Your perspective.
Yep.
The city is changing, and we've got big questions, and it's great to know that people like you have had their hands in it at certain points of time.
Yep.
Now you're a pastor at Pacific Keep.
Yep.
And so we appreciate you serving the community in that way, in a faith-based way.
Sure.
Very valuable. We appreciate you and what you've done for the city.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast. Appreciate it.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
The economy is getting stronger. Banks are lending again, and interest rates are at historic lows. Now is a great time to buy your dream home. The caring and knowledgeable professionals at Homes for You have been helping people just like you for over 20 years. They take the time to listen to what you want and will help you find just the right home in Washington or Idaho. Real estate is what we do at Homes for You, 928-5782, or visit online at homes4uspokane.com.
This is River Ridge Frame Shop, called Frame It Today, where we can take your art, customize it, and get it ready to hang on the wall. Here at River Ridge Hardware, 2803 West Garland.
Weather in the inland northwest can wear you down. And if your gutters are in poor condition or you do not have gutters, you could suffer damage that could cost a fortune to fix. Rainman Seamless Rain Gutters has almost 30 years of professional experience in serving the inland northwest region and strives to ensure customer service that is second to none from the time you call to the end of the project.
This is Kent Adams, and I want you to hear some of the reviews of the music of 68-year-old Spokane-based Tim Brummett is receiving from music critics around the country.
Tim's EP, the music we played on, is maybe one of the best records I have reviewed in the last 2 years. Logan Hurst, critic. producer at Spider Hounds Productions in New Zealand. Tim is a natural songwriter. I have reviewed many songs, and this is some of the best songwriting and storytelling I have heard in a long time. Kara Kresnikoff, music producer, Nashville. Tim's The Music to Be Played On is simply stellar songwriting, and this song is one of the most inspiring I have heard in years. Beerslaver Productions, Toronto.
All night long, I believe in a midnight.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by Local 29 Firefighters Union, Well Dressed Walrus, and Homes for You.